All right, guys, so today we're going to explore the quad family tree a little bit more detail. Before we get into that, you need to check your homework. Here are the answers, and you really, really, really need to make sure that your answers are accurate. So please pause the video now and check your answers and make corrections. Okay, so now that that's done, we want to kind of dive into the relationship between all of these different quads. How they're related to each other, and they actually do make somewhat of a family tree. So open up a new page in OneNote, if you will, and let's call it the quad family tree. And while you're doing that, let's talk a little bit about a family tree. A family tree with you and your family works exactly the same way it does with quads. So for your family tree, you've got maybe like your grandparents and then your parents and then the kid, you're one of the kids of those parents, and you share characteristics of your parents and your grandparents, but then there are things about you that make you uniquely you. And that's exactly how the quad family tree works. So I guess I would say like the grandparents of the quad family tree, if you will, is the quad. So up here at the top, you have the quadrilateral. And what makes something a quad? It's four-sided, right? And I'm just going to kind of abbreviate these ideas. So it's four-sided. Well, then the quad kind of had like three kids. And all of these kids have to share this characteristic. They have to all be four-sided because they are the children of the quad. So they have to share all the same characteristics of the quad, but then there have to be things about it as well that make it uniquely different from the quad or special. And these are the things that make that difference. This sort of branch over here to the left, we'll say this has no parallel sides. We're going to say this one way over here on the right has exactly one pair of parallel sides. And then we're going to say this guy in the middle has two pairs of parallel sides. All right, so let's start with the easy one. Let's start with no parallel sides. So if you go back to that chart, that one quad that had no pairs of parallel sides is the kite, right? And then you kind of created a definition for a kite the other day in class. You said that a kite is a quad, which we don't have to restate because now that we're making the family tree, we already know that it's the child of the quad, so it has to be a quad. So we don't need to restate that. But we do want to say that the kite has two of adjacent congruent sides. That's the definition you guys came up with in class last class, and so that's the one that we're going to stick with. Then over here, on exactly one pair of parallel sides, we have the trapezoid. And we already know that the trapezoid is a quad because it's in the family tree, and we know it has exactly one pair of parallel sides. Well, then the quad or the trapezoid had a baby, and that child is also a trapezoid, but it's a special trapezoid. It's an isosceles trapezoid. So now we're really getting into what it means to be a part of a family tree. So this isosceles trapezoid has all the characteristics of a trapezoid, all the characteristics of a quad, because it follows the family tree that way, and then something that makes it unique. And the thing that makes it unique is that on this trapezoid, these two legs have to be congruent. My drawing is really horrible, but those two legs have to be congruent. Now, the middle section of the quad family tree. This is the part that's a little more complicated. So we have this quad that has two pairs of parallel sides. Well, you should already know that that's a parallelogram, right? And then the parallelogram kind of had like two children. And one of them is a rhombus. Now, we already know, because this is a family tree, that the rhombus has all the characteristics of a parallelogram, all the characteristics of a quad, and then something that makes it uniquely different. And that thing is that it has 4 congruent sides. And you might want to just draw that and mark it. As a matter of fact, we might want to do that for all of these, right? Let's go back to the isosceles trapezoid and put its parallel sides on there. Let's go back to the trapezoid and put its parallel sides on there. We'll go back to the parallelogram, mark its parallel sides, and the kite, and mark its congruent sides. Well done. Now the parallelogram also had a rectangle. So you know that a rectangle has to have all the characteristics of a parallelogram and something that makes it uniquely special. And that is that it has 4 right angles, right? So 4 right angles, and opposite sides are congruent, but I believe that was already true for a parallelogram. Okay, this is where things get a little funky as far as the family tree is concerned. Of course, this wouldn't happen in real life, hopefully. But we have the square that actually shares all the characteristics of the rhombus and the rectangle and everything above it on this particular branch of the family tree. So it's got the 4 congruent sides from the rhombus. It's got the 4 right angles from the rectangle, and then everything up above it as far as the parallelogram is concerned. Okay, so this is a picture of the quad family tree. Now what I want you to do is, first off, you got to have this quad family tree in your notes. So if you weren't copying this down, this would be a good time to pause the video and get all this stuff in your notes. The second thing that you need to do is you need to go back to the homework, and you need to kind of like input all of the information that's from this chart here into your quad family tree. But remember, if you understand how the quad family tree works, you don't have to rewrite and rewrite. For instance, in a parallelogram, opposite sides are always congruent. We said yes. So going back to the quad family tree, we can write in, for the parallelogram, opposite sides congruent. And then I don't have to write that for the rhombus or the rectangle or the square, because if you understand how a family tree works, you know that the rhombus, the rectangle, and the square are going to have the same characteristics as the parallelogram. So I only need to write that for parallelogram. I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at the next characteristics of a parallelogram. Opposite angles are always congruent. We said yes. So I'm going to go back here and I'm going to write opposite angles congruent. And then I don't have to write that for the rhombus, the rectangle, or the square, because those things share all the characteristics of a parallelogram. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video now and do exactly what I'm doing. Go back to all of the yeses that are on your table from your homework and input that information into the family tree where it belongs so that your family tree is super complete. Go ahead and pause the video and do that now. All right, now that that's done, last thing I want to chat with you about is the fact that with your family tree here, there's a way to read it for those pesky true and false types of questions. These are the types I'm talking about. Questions like, all squares are rectangles. And I'm going to put a question mark next to that because we're going to try to figure out the answer to that. And things like all parallelograms are rhombuses. Things like that. Well, here's a little trick that can help you answer these types of questions. If you memorize the location of everything on the family tree, then all you have to remember is that climbing the tree is good and falling out of the tree is bad. Now here's what I mean by that. Let's take this first example. All squares are rectangles. If you read the sentence from left to right, which clearly you do, the first shape you get to is square, and the second shape you get to is rectangle. So if I go back to the family tree, I read all squares are rectangles. And to answer that question, I have to climb the tree from the square to the rectangle. Climbing the tree is good. That means this answer is true. Now, the second statement that you have here is all parallelograms are rhombuses. Well, the first quad in the sentence is parallelogram, and the second quad in the sentence is rhombuses. So if I read that sentence and follow my family tree, I have all parallelograms are rhombuses. And from quad 1 to quad 2, I fall out of the tree. I'm going down my quad family tree. Falling out of the tree is bad, so that statement is false. So all you have to remember is climbing the tree is good, falling out of the tree is bad. And then if you read your all sentences, and this only works for the all type of sentences. If you read your all sentences as either climbing the tree or falling out of the tree, then you're solid as far as knowing whether those statements are true and false. Guarantee there'll be some of those on the test. All right, so now that you've got a good picture of how all the quads are related to each other, now it's time to try to practice your skills a little bit in your homework. Your homework is on Net Classroom, and it looks like, let's see if I can, quad family tree homework. Sorry about that. You know how that first page is always blank. But it looks a little bit like this. It's called Properties of Parallelograms. Those X'd out problems are ones that you don't have to deal with. You don't need to worry about those. But if you have any time left in class now, I want you to go ahead and work on this and then Dropbox it as soon as you're finished. All right, thanks guys, and have a great day.